Okay. So this morning we're going to continue. As some of you know, we're on retreat. Some of us are on retreat. Some of us are just showing up as usual on a Sunday morning, or maybe not as usual. Okay. So we were asked a question yesterday in our session, and the question is there a hierarchy of questions? So we'd like to explore that together this morning, Nellie and I, as our conversation.
So we did indeed state in our blurb for the retreat, and we read it at the beginning, and I believe it's in this very sentence is in our book, which does speak to our hierarchy in a general terms, which is there are many forms of questioning. Some open up views and uncover more about experience. Others are too probing or provoking or feel judgmental, close down inquiry and exploration. So there you see a hierarchy. The first one is what we think is higher of the hierarchy, the opening up of views, uncovering more about experience. And then the second sentence, we consider it not so great, lower on the hierarchy, questions that are too probing or provoking or have a judgmental quality or edge to them, and close down inquiry and exploration.
Right. So we're kind of using that formula right now in our teaching and the way we're talking about questions. In some respects, it could be skillful and unskillful, a hierarchy that we find for us, what are more skillful things that open up, what are unskillful things that close down. But we also wanted to bring in one of the Buddha's hierarchies, something that we found that kind of shows his direction around questions. And I'll read this, Nellie, if that's, yeah. So he said that if a man or woman had been shot by an arrow and was taken to a doctor, and before the doctor could take out the arrow, the person would insist that he find out first who shot the arrow, who made the arrow, what the arrow was made of, what kind of wood, what kind of feathers. And as the Buddha said, if the doctor tried to answer all of those questions, the man would die first. The person would die first. So the first order of business there is to take out the arrow. And if the person still wanted to know the answer to some of those questions, he could ask afterwards.
So that's very pragmatic. That was very clearly a life and death situation. And there are other situations, perhaps not as sort of obvious or dire as this, where pragmatic, responses are more important than asking other kinds of questions, like existential questions at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And in that way of looking at that's kind of clear cut, right? I mean, life and death is extreme. So it's clear cut at that point. But in our own hierarchies, we're really looking at like opening things up, seeing more conditions, but that's not the time to open things up and see more conditions. That's the time to do something and take some actions. But also in this direction of opening things up is we're not looking to destabilize ourselves or ask so many questions in the guise of opening something up that you feel ungrounded.
Right. Rather, we're looking at this, because we're on the slow and gradual path. In Buddhism, there's some, faster paths or instant enlightenment or whatever. But no, we're much more on the slow wearing away path. And so our path of slow and wearing away is about seeing more conditions that are at play. Again, not when you have to take action. You can come back to that afterwards, but really seeing more conditions and seeing some of the views, underlying views that are leading to the situation or how you respond or relate to the situation.
Yeah. I think this was a question that often came to me and maybe still does at times. And Nellie, I think probably you've dealt with this too. That's why it's on our list here. But this is what we would consider an unskillful question.
Probably many people have asked this question too. I bet we're not alone here.
We are not. We don't. What's wrong with me? This question just seems to come up, I mean, at many times throughout our practice. And for me, I had a predominance of it when I first came to practice, and it's lessened. Oh, it's kind of worn away over time. But we have an idea of like a more skillful question than that would be, what was going on for me when I felt bad?
Or again, always again, what conditions were at play that led to me feeling so bad that I took it up as me, that it was me that was wrong. How did I get to that?
Right.
And again, I want to say though, the question, what's wrong with me, is really, it's actually very simple and clear cut. There's something wrong and it's me. And, so maybe it's just the start of questioning, and then you see through that question and you kind of, work with that first response.
And I think it's a default that we talk about in Buddhism to the self. I mean, it's just the automatic response is to the self or other, as there's something wrong with them. And it, like you said, it's easy to identify, but knowing that it's just the starting question and that there's other things that will come from that will be more important for us to look at and to take up.
Yeah, and here's another unskillful question. Somebody close to you dies and you say, why did they die and I am still alive? Not so skillful, unanswerable question. But the more skillful question in a situation like this, again, how do I best respond? Because we can't know, why one of us dies young and another dies older. This is unanswerable.
Right. And yet
we can get little answers, right? I took good care of myself, but it's more complicated or mysterious.
Yeah, and I think back to, let's just say some of these questions will arise. It's the taking them up and really investing in them and exploring them. And I don't think that one is so well explored when it happens at the time of a death. I mean, it's more like, how do I be there for the people who are, who have survived, or how do I plan a funeral, or how do I, like you said, best respond?
Yeah.
So
you have your own hierarchies about questions, about probably much of what you do in your life. And actually, hierarchies are not necessarily hierarchy is not a dirty word. It's how hierarchies function that can lead to problems, because hierarchies can, again, as we're talking at it, show you what's more skillful, what's more helpful, how to best respond. If this is a more important question, then let's take it up. And if this is an unanswerable or unskillful question, let it kind of don't feed it. Don't feed it.
Don't feed it. Let it peter out a little bit. Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought this point was interesting, Nellie. We talked about this morning. Is there's really no need to get perfectly clear about what your hierarchy is right now, or what it was, or what it's going to be in the future. And I think often we can spend a lot of time trying to be very clear on it. But I think a little bit clear is helpful, right?
We're back to that middle path. We always return there, which is just fine. It's very good, really.
Yeah. How are we on time? It looks like
we're just about perfect.
Great.
So maybe we could leave it just like right there.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. And, what's some skillful question that's been working for you on this retreat or in your practice, if you're, thinking about questions, if you take up the topic? What are some things that have really worked for you, more skillful?